Refreshing and stimulating talk. Power 98.7. Now we're talking.
Let's now move on to a subject matter that I think I'm probably not alone in this one, where I say it's a subject matter that I've always wondered about, but was too scared to ask or to vocalize. And that is the issue or the subject of, the sexual needs of people with disabilities. Because most of it is born out of ignorance, because we don't understand a lot of disabilities and how they manifest in the body. We make a lot of assumptions, including about people, for example, who are paraplegics or people who are in wheelchairs. You assume that someone who can't walk, you assume certain things about them. So now, even though sex is a basic human need, even considered in some countries like the Netherlands, apparently it is even considered a human right, not just a human need. Well, it can, in spite of all of that, it can be one of the most overlooked needs for people living with disabilities. Talking openly about sex, sexuality, sexual desire, and sexual identity, as well as navigating sexual relations and reproductive rights and contraception, is awkward enough for many people. Add to this the burden of South Africa's hangover of Calvinistic apartheid past, where the Immorality Act policed people's sexual relations. Well, on top of this is the harsh reality of being a person living with a disability in an ableist world. There are even more complexities and experiences of exclusion when a person with a disability is queer or identifies as queer and or gender non-conforming or even transgender for that matter. To help us navigate the subject and understand it a little bit better, we are joined on the line by Dr. Vic McKinney, who's a postdoctoral research fellow at the Division of Disabilities and Rehabilitation Studies at Stellenbosch University. Dr. Vic, good evening to you.
Good evening to you too.
Not to be mistaken for Dr. Victor.
No, I'm not as musical as he is.
You do not have any Rasta rebels of your own.
No, I like to sing, but I've been banned from singing in my house. I'm terrible.
I'm so grateful for you making time for us at this late hour. Thank you so much. First, Dr. Vic, let me understand why this is a research area of speciality for you. What is your interest in the subject? Why is this of particular interest to you?
I'm disabled. I became disabled as a 19-year-old student. I was involved in an accident and woke up without being able to move. I'm paralyzed from the shoulders down. So that was almost 38 years ago. And at that time, there was very little support or discussion around it, especially during my time rehabilitating from hospital, etc. It wasn't really focused on. And I spent about 9 months recuperating in hospital. And there was no discussion beyond my medical needs, even no discussion about life and community support, let alone being in a relationship or being even having sexuality or being recognized as that. At that time, the message to me was kind of loud and clear: is that if you couldn't be fixed, if you couldn't be healed, then you didn't belong in that sense. While I was recovering, I remember I was given forms to go live in a special home, and while we've changed that kind of view, the idea is that if people become disabled or born with a disability, the idea we have now is that they must be reintegrated in the communities or maintain some kind of participation and contribution like any other member of society. But we still try to catch up against traditional attitudes, which are difficult. And that takes time and it takes change. If we're going to make these changes, we need to support the communities and the service providers in tackling that and in recognizing the personal dignity and personhood of our own humanity and who we are. I think sexuality is a large part of everyday life. It's something we tend to take for granted until, you're seen as quote-unquote losing it or not being regarded as someone who can be seen as a kind of valued member of society or as an equal partner.
So I imagine a lot of this is born out of ignorance and also of and just also a cultural thing. Let me, for example, start when I talk about ignorance. Let me say this: when you've just described your own paralysis and you're saying you're paralyzed from the shoulders down. Now, my understanding, my lay understanding, is of that. That means that below your shoulders, you have got no feelings. Would that be correct? And I'm using very simple language when I say no feelings. But
sometimes that's the case.
or
Those who
sometimes.
become paralyzed.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It depends. Paralysis is usually caused by the cutting of the spinal cord.
Mm.
And what can often happen in an accident is that your vertebra will break and they cut the spinal cord. And the spinal cord is kind of like the telephone cables of the body. It carries the nerves and messages. So your brain will send messages to your body to say, do this and do that. And your body in turn will send messages back to your brain saying, this is what I'm feeling. It's hot, I'm cold, I'm itchy, or whatever. And we have these messages happening all the time in a split second. When the cut is caught, then it depends how you become paralyzed. So I can still feel throughout my body. My left side is stronger than my right side, but that's just how the damage is done to the cords. In other words, not all of those little cables in my spinal cord are cut. There's still one or two things that are the messages that are getting through. But sometimes it's complete and all the cords are cut.
Okay. That said, then, what should be the approach when dealing with people with disabilities or even engaging in conversations about this subject matter? I mean, it's easy enough to say, well, just talk to them as you would speak to any other able-bodied person, you know.
Yeah,
But we always
really
assume sensitivities and sensibilities on behalf of people with disabilities, whether it's people with that are visually impaired or any other type of disability for that matter. We
exactly.
assume certain things on their behalf.
Yeah, I think most of the time we're overthinking it.
Yeah.
And I think it's also because, like you say, there's a lack of interaction. And that comes from, as you've come to school and separate schooling, or there's general exclusion of people with disabilities. So there's a lack of understanding and just a lack of interaction. But I always, when I present or talk to my students or whoever I'm talking to, I'd say, look, just say hello. And somebody might say hello back or not. And that's fine. The worst thing about being talked to, maybe wrongly, is not being talked to.
Yeah.
Rather engage with someone than not, and find out.
And
you'll
find
find
out.
out the person is just the same as you. It's like what I tell my students as well is that imagine if you become disabled, how would you like to be treated?
Yeah.
And you'd like to be treated the same, not as someone different. So that's, I think, something for a lot of students to remember. If you were disabled, how do you think you'd like to be treated? The same or somebody different?
Okay.
And I think the answer's obvious. So just turn it around, and that's the best way to view it.
Okay, let's talk about the physiological challenges or aspects of sexuality amongst people with disabilities that we need to understand and be aware of that can influence, their ability to have sexual relations and interactions.
Well, I think it's like everything. I mean, we see so many adverts about erectile dysfunction and the stigma around that, whether you have a disability or not. And the whole thing is put on performance. And what I found from my experiences is that it's really about intimacy and communication. So if I may use my example, I was 19. When I had my accident, I was first to university. I was an art student. I just had a new girlfriend. I was living life to the full. I was really enjoying it and kind of on the brink of manhood. And then I was in that accident and I woke up completely paralyzed. And it was difficult to get through that. Not only that, but I had to go home. My mom had to do everything for me like I was 10 months old again. So I never imagined that in those early days that I'd ever be able to, participate in family, even be in a relationship. And that just took time and gradually. I mean, even I think it was about 6 years after my accident where I actually started to act more and was in a relationship, and then that led to more relationships and my confidence built, and I discovered that I could. In the beginning, I couldn't perform sexually, for example, and that gradually got better, and I discovered how my body works and how it responded, and it was working with it. But I think that a lot of emphasis, is so much emphasis on performance, where the key thing is intimacy and communication. So I think you got to be open and share with your partner who's doing it, especially for someone in my position. I can't wear arms or legs, so I need to tell my partner what to do or what I like, or for example, and that's how I learned. And sure, I wasn't very experienced before my accident anyway, but it's just I learned that the most important thing is about communication and intimacy.
That is
far beyond
such a.
anything else.
That is
And that
such.
to me has been the standard.
That is such an important point that you raise, and it's such a good point, Doc, that you raised there about our obsession with performance, and that is why people will be going and drinking taking all kinds of things, in the pursuit of the perfect erection, the perfect round of sex. But what you say there about it is what you're actually bringing back sex to what. Okay, and I don't want to be going now the Calvinistic route but what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be an act of intimacy.
Yes. Yes. I guess a Calvinistic view would be it's just for procreation.
Yes, yes. Fair point. Yeah.
It wasn't something to be enjoyed, but I mean, I think hopefully we get past that. And it's something that we say. And sexuality isn't always about performance. To me, sexuality, the term sexuality, is about how we feel about ourselves. It starts the moment we wake up, what we wear, how we comb our hair, how we do our face, what we decide to do, how we walk, how we speak. And that's just a natural progression in our lives as we become teenagers and sexual beings. So to suddenly try and deny that kind of is not natural. And it's denying someone, the natural place in their life and their life course. And it's something we all kind of take for granted, even though it's not really spoken about. And I think that's part of the problem, is that from a traditional point of view, disability was linked to things that were wrong or something that wasn't normal or not natural.
Yes.
And so before we had scientific and medical explanations for different impairments and conditions, the disability was interpreted often as a punishment towards parents or a curse from God or the ancestors or associated with witchcraft and those type of things. So that lack of understanding led to negative association of disability. And of people like myself when I came out of hospital, of someone in need of charity and in need of care all the time. But I'm not sick, I'm just paralyzed.
Absolutely.
But those societal attitudes, I think, created a thing where people with disabilities are inferior or having less value, not being able to contribute. So that means in turn you become less attractive.
I'm wondering because, as you were saying, you were a young man, on the verge of maybe reaching full manhood when you had your accident. Your brain, as you said, the only thing that was different about you when you came out of hospital is that you were paralyzed. Your brain still functioned perfectly normally, which is why you end up now pursuing a postdoctoral studies. And then, but you will still remain attracted to the same people you were attracted to before. But I'm wondering now how your disability now or your paralysis changed your approach in terms of, you did say it took you 6 years, a good 6 years before you got into relationships, but how did it change your attitude towards, the people that you were ordinarily interested in? Were you still free to, flirt with us, in a way that you would have anyway in the past? I know you were still a bit of a novice then still. But were you able to, did you now all of a sudden start looking out for hot blondes in wheelchairs?
No, I think in the beginning, when I remember being I came out of hospital, I was 19 and then 20 the first year. It was just really hard at home. And it hits you when you come home and trying to get back into the community. And how I was treated, it took me many years just to accept my disability. At that time, I never imagined I would live very long. I couldn't see the point because I couldn't see a quality to my life. I didn't believe I had quality of life. And I never imagined I would even get past 30. Not knowing what would happen, I just never imagined living long, and I didn't really want to. I kind of rejected life in that sense. So it's not just one single factor, and the fact that I got in a relationship was kind of by accident, by chance, and I'm ever thankful, for having that, because it gave me confidence and it gave me the realization that I could be attracted to somebody else. And then as I get in a few more relationships.
Are you a good-looking guy, Dr. Vic?
Perhaps, maybe. It's not for me to decide. But I think it's not how you look. It's your approach, and your confidence, and your ability to communicate.
Right.
So
absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And what do you find, though? I mean, at least in your interaction, in your research work that you're doing, what do people who are, disabled say about the challenges that they face, or in trying to get into intimate relationships, and maybe lessons that they wish they could learn, they could share with, the able-bodied people?
I think the key thing is come back to what you were saying earlier. It's just engagement. The thing what we really like the most in our society is the belief that people with disabilities are different because we're not familiar with them, and that's understandable because if you have we don't have inclusive schools. If we all came up through inclusive schools, it wouldn't be something different.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't be nervous about. We wouldn't see the disabilities. If you put kids in schools together with different disabilities, when they grow up, they don't see the differences. And we've seen that, in all different walks of life. So the interaction is important. And the more you spend time around someone with disability, the more you realize they're just like you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most natural thing. And so, again, just turn it around. Imagine if you became disabled.
What would I want? Yes.
Exactly. You'd still want to do the same things. You'd want to work. You'd want to be a radio presenter, whether you're in a wheelchair or not, whether you became blind or lost your hearing. How would you overcome some of these things?
Yeah.
But just still be a person.
Yeah.
I think what's challenging is and what's really tough is when you have children with disabilities, maybe with intellectual or learning disabilities growing up. We have a natural tendency to protect them, and rightly so, because their safety is priority. At the same time, if we don't discuss sexuality, we can also do them at a disservice and leave them more vulnerable. So these are kind of things we need to work with. We need collaboration is key, and working with service providers, working with policymakers, working with people with disabilities and their families and caregivers, to working together. So often, and what I experienced for the majority of my life in a wheelchair is that I was told what I needed by the medical profession. I was prescribed to. And as I started to find my own path in life, I thought, hang on, you're talking from a textbook. We need a lot of education and training by disability. And that involves collaboration. It involves working with people with disabilities from school, high schools, into universities and colleges and at all stages. So a key passion of mine is inclusive education and just awareness of disability across all disciplines, whether it's teaching, health and care, law, architecture, engineering. So that, because we constantly produce graduates from our universities and colleges who know very little about disability, how to communicate and how to accommodate them. And also in our economy. And, that's something that needs to change. It's recognizing the person. And along with that comes our natural sexuality and who we are as people.
Let me bring in a caller. I've got Arnold on the line from Mabopane. Hey, Arnold, good evening.
Good evening, Titi. I hope you and the guests are well there. And let me thank Power FM and UTT for always opening this platform for people with disabilities so that we can come and engage.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Titi and the guest, I think what's most important that we need to do is communication. We need to raise awareness so that the community must accept us. Sometimes I don't blame them. I'll give, when I conclude, my last example. But let me start from what happened yesterday on the show. Somebody called yesterday, and then he wanted to know how Malwande can watch soccer. Remember?
Yes,
that's what we need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what we need. We need people to ask us questions. But now, for the subject matter of today, it's very hurting to realize that even the health professionals don't accommodate us. As a disability activist myself, there was this lady who came to me because she had a problem. She went to the clinic. She was on a wheelchair. She was pregnant. And, when she arrived there in a clinic here in Mawopani, it's like the nurses here, they were ridiculing her. They were talking on their own there to say, but shame.
Unbelievable.
Men are so heartless.
Who can
do this to? Who can do this to this woman? As if she doesn't have feelings. She doesn't, So sometimes we are afraid even to go and approach clinics because now we are even ridiculed by health professionals. They don't think we can be involved in sexual activities. So that's why I'm saying awareness is very much important. And Titi, maybe I'd like you to engage, maybe to contact me with this gentleman. Maybe we can exchange numbers. And Titi, thank you very much, man. I always listen to this segment. That's why I participate. We are very thankful to Power FM for this platform.
Thank you very much for that endorsement. I appreciate that. And indeed, we will certainly share Dr. Vic's contact details with you, and we will be more than happy to put you in touch. Thank you very much for coming through.
Thank you.
All right. Dr. Vic, I wonder whether you would have comment on what Arnold just expressed there about, and unfortunately, what he describes there about the ridiculing by, health workers. Unfortunately, it doesn't. This one is not just confined, maybe, or reserved for people with disabilities. But there's just a generally bad treatment that people receive in our public hospitals. But just if you wanted to, I don't know if there's anything specific you wanted to pick up on what he was saying. I think he also emphasized the importance of communication.
Yeah, thanks, Arnold. That was a very good point. And you're right. And I think it comes back to what you mentioned earlier, TT, was the point about, not challenging, but kind of enhancing our traditional values and how it's recognizing how it's been impacted by different things over the generations. And what I view is, so it's really giving a voice to people, in this case with disabilities, a voice within their own community to talk. And it's just everyday scenarios, whether it's at some kind of event or at the church or at school or amongst, through the committee with the elders, etc., and working with communities. So just share experiences. So that so often, and I hear this time and time again, people with disabilities generally don't have a voice, or haven't been given a voice. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier about so often we are prescribed to what we can and cannot do. But if you listen to what we have to say, we're just like you. I'm a person the same as anybody else with a disability. So it's about giving the chance to speak, and then we realize, okay, it's just like me, and that leads to acceptance and understanding. So I agree with Arnold about awareness is key, and interaction. And don't be scared of disability. There's nothing really to be scared of. It's about working with people.
Yeah.
By the way, then attitudes of professionals come from their communities.
Yeah.
So, if no matter what whether you become a lawyer, doctor, or engineer, whatever, you still, what you've been taught in your home life will carry through your life. And in your professional practice, etc. So that's why it's very important to incorporate the area of disability into training and education.
You said something there about that we wouldn't be dealing with this, and I think that's a good point. It's the very important point that you made about the fact that if we, children with disabilities were integrated into schools of able-bodied children, and that it was just normal to have somebody in a wheelchair, to have somebody who is visually impaired, or somebody who's, who's deaf, or whatever the disability, that we would all be better equipped. And I wonder, as an academic, where you stand on this one, Dr. Vic, in terms of should we perhaps maybe relook at the way we do that? I mean, these children with disabilities come from homes where they live with people that are able-bodied, you know. So why do they suddenly become? I do understand there are logistical issues and all of that, but those same logistical issues exist in the home. So I wonder where you stand on the integration issue.
I think inclusion is really important. Do you mean inclusion in families or inclusion in schools?
In schools. I'm talking about in schools. I mean, if it happens in schools, because, I mean, in a
Yes.
home, it has to happen. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And often it's a real, what we've learned, and it's been with everything, has been that the more we interact with people who are different to us, the more familiar we become and the less scared we become, and the more we accept them and understand them. And that's been, I grew up in a time of apartheid, and then saw the modern free schools come into play. And when schools are going to be integrated, people went, what you going to do? And I can't let my child go to the school. And it was so easy. It happened so easy.
Yeah.
Easy. And the kids really don't. The kids are kids, and they're accepting and cruel in other ways, and they learn things and they fall down and back up. And you need that. But as you mature and develop in life, you want to have diversity around you, because the more you have that, the more you appreciate, and the more tolerant and understanding you are. So I think inclusive education and education is a real key issue, and something I've been passionate about all the time, because the more inclusive we are, our education system, the more inclusive our society will become.
Absolutely. Just going back to the sexuality side of things here, I'm curious. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry for racially profiling you and assuming that you are into blondes.
Not a problem.
I wanted to ask you this. That I mean, in terms of your own relationship, are you in a, it seems to me that I suspect that you are perhaps a better lover than you would have been, had you learned, had been very sexually active before your paralysis. Because I'm thinking that you have learned about sex when you were, mostly once you were, after you were paralyzed, which has probably in some ways made you a better lover. And I mean, I know you have got nothing to compare it with. What would you say to that?
I've actually said that quite a few times.
Oh, okay.
I think that's my learning to focus more on communication and being intimate with somebody, and I believe has made me a better lover. I can't speak for anyone else.
We'd have to ask your lover.
I got to a stage where, I remember being in the early days and being with someone, and I thought, I wasn't worried about my hair or whatever. If she wanted to be with me, she wanted to be with me, and that was fantastic. And it was just not worrying about it. In a way, I just thought, well, what else could go wrong? Just in a way. And I wasn't worried how I looked, or, am I saying the right thing? Just be yourself, and that, to me, was a route to learn. There was a difficult way to do it, but I think the more we take away from only the performance aspect, the more we look at the holistic approach. That worked for me, and I'm sure it's worked for a lot more other people, and I would say most people would agree with that.
And then I'm assuming, would it be correct to assume that the people that you've been in relationships with have been people who are able-bodied?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I have.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have any? Did you have any trust issues at first, Dr. Vic, when you started to get into these relationships where, you felt like you wanted to be fully where you felt like you maybe couldn't trust somebody to know that they are in it for the right reasons? Because as you said, the last thing you wanted to be was a charity case for anybody.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think and I think this applies whether you're disabled or not. So I
True.
played at the age of 19, and then I was disabled, and then I was many years before I was in a relationship. But through my kind of late 20s and 30s,
Mm.
so my maturity in general in life was kind of halted and stopped and started.
True.
So I kind of had my teenage years in my late 20s and 30s, and I had to learn about relationships. And there was a time to me where just having sex was the best thing in the world, and all I really worried about. But I wasn't really with the right person, and I was giving myself away. And I think we've all been there, whether you're disabled or not. But it's having the opportunity to do that, and be able to put yourself in a position to be there. And I think you just sometimes got to take a risk and think, what the hell? We live once, let's go for it. And at the same time, trying to take more interest in your partner and just sharing how you feel. And learning, and also not giving yourself away. I think it's also easy to do. And again, that's why, unfortunately, we have this a nasty side, or a very horrible side to disability and sexuality, where a lot of people with disabilities are taken advantage of. And we have a lot of abuse in that situation. And that's a really tough one to do. But I think the more we have these kind of discussions, and we're very grateful for it, like these radio talks, is to get people talking. Because so often it's not spoken about. And traditionally, disability isn't really spoken about and not discussed openly. So often when I'm in public and a child, I love talking to children because they're so open. And so a child will say, oh, look at that guy, he can't move, what's wrong with you? And what do you do? And I'll happily explain to the child.
Yes.
I like talking to 6 and 7-year-olds because they ask simple questions like, how do you poo? And what do you do where parents are embarrassed? But I say, no, it's good that they learn, and I want them to learn at this age. And I think, so disability is not spoken about, and sexuality as well is a sensitive topic. And when I start discussions or workshops, or if I'm participating in them, I say, look, guys, if we're having this discussion in class, remember, there's no right or wrong answer. Everybody's got a different way of looking at it. And we need to respect the space and acknowledge that it's a sensitive topic for many people. So it's not openly spoken about in communities, and also from generation to generation. At the same time, we need to support and help and collaborate once again, especially with caregivers and families for many of our youth with disabilities. Before they get into trouble, to try and protect them, but also help them develop their own sexuality and understand it at least, without just being, some kids have to be kept away, and parents kept their kids kind of almost detained, for quote unquote, just because they're trying to protect them. And it's not necessarily the caregiver's fault, because, as I said, priority is important, but they don't know where to turn to or don't have the right support. So there's a lot of different aspects we need to explore. From, yes, let's talk about it, but let's talk about in the good and the bad, and let's try to make it a healthier notion in our country and in our society about how we deal with sexuality and disability, so that in years to come, people who are pregnant and in wheelchairs aren't ridiculed or aren't scolded by nursing staff. Yeah.
I wonder, there's just something that I know. I just don't know. I was noting there that we haven't touched on as well. It's about the work that you are doing through the safe centers, or the safe spaces program that are being made to create appropriate vocabulary for example, for deaf children and teenagers to discuss their bodies, sex and sexuality. And that's something that one takes for granted, that you assume that we don't talk about, like, how obviously you would communicate with young children about sex, children that have disability, children that are that use sign language. Does the vocab exist? How do you talk about sex to a blind child and that sort of thing?
Yeah. And I think that's often the case that comes in with protection, and how do we approach it the right way? I think, it's not only not only kids with disabilities, but I think part of the problem is that we look at our children with disabilities, even when they're young, and we put a ceiling on them. We think, well, because they can't see or they can't hear properly, or they can't function in the way that I'm functioning, or something wrong with their legs, then they can't be educated. And I think it's a misconception completely. You know, and I've certainly learned more from children I've worked with than I've ever managed to teach them. And I've seen amazing parents and children do, and people with disabilities do amazing things when you have the right support. And I think that goes for any child. But so often we automatically exclude children with disabilities from being able to be educated. And that's, not fair. And that also comes into play as it become teenagers and are sexually maturing or physically maturing. And we need to address those needs so that they can understand what they're going through and be able to talk about it, and also protect themselves and know that there are other people that they can talk to.
Absolutely.
And I think that key point is not only about kids with disabilities, but people without disabilities also.
About all kids, yeah.
But all kids, a lot of kids grow up with the wrong views of sex or what they should be doing in a relationship or not, and depending on their background, or where they come from, or what level of abuse has been, if there has been, and how to talk about it. And you've got to have discussions. So we found research has shown that in general, not speaking about sexuality is not helpful to anybody, and it only leaves kids more vulnerable and more targeted.
Absolutely.
So in terms of safe centers, there's some amazing work being done in a lot of different organizations in developing modules and like for kids who can't read, maybe they're illiterate, but signing and or communication barriers, kids with intellectual disabilities, and making pamphlets and making booklets for caregivers and for kids to have an understanding and how to talk about it, and just so that the more knowledge is key and knowledge is power, and the more you learn, the more you understand, the more empowered you are, and the more confident you are to be able to do something. It doesn't mean you'll still make all the right choices, and any of us will tell you the same thing, especially regarding relationships. But it's a learning curve. You want to be able to talk to somebody about it when you've been through something. And that's, I think, important.
I'm wondering about something like social spaces. There's the idea that, for example, this whole concept of gatekeeping by caregivers, and some of it I would imagine is is coming from a very good place, and wishing to protect the person with a disability here, and that they end up now blocking that person and that young person, I suppose, if they are still with the caregiver and all of that, from actually learning and experiencing what their age mates are experiencing. But as I said, it's coming from a good place. But I often also wonder, let's say you had a more open-minded caregiver or a parent or whatever who wanted their child to go and experience these things. These social spaces, do they exist for people with disabilities where they want to go and meet intimate partners, in an environment that is actually also friendly for them, So,
I think it's a very good question, and to be honest, I don't know. I mean, I went through my teenage years. I mean, I haven't dated for a long time. I've been married for 40 years. I've got 2 kids, so I'm kind of settled. But I think what's important is to create look, there are many dating apps out there and many places of that. It's about gaining access and understanding how they work. And I mean, even with children, we want to be able to protect them from. I've got a 13-year-old, and it's we're very wary of what sites he visits online, if he even goes, how much screen time he has. Just in terms of there are a lot of nasty people out there, and you want to equip your child as best as possible to be able to go forward in the world and meet partners and respect them and maintain his own self-respect and dignity. And I think with that, and with caregivers, we need, if we don't expand them, we need to support them at the same time and work with them. And to use a very simple example, was about inclusive education we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
So we had a great policy called, a symbolic policy was White Paper 6 about inclusive education, came out in 2000 or 1998. And it was about inclusive schools. But there wasn't enough support for teachers to help us. So even teachers who were open to the idea were saying, well, I've got 40 kids in my class, and now you want me to take a child with disability. I'm not trained or equipped to how do I look after this child in my class? And so taking that kind of example into a family or having a parent with of a child with a disability, if you don't have the right support and network and you guys just struggle to know what to do and how to protect your child. And as you say, it comes from a good place. But sometimes the only option you can see is to keep your child at home and not going out anywhere.
Yeah.
And just not exposing them to that kind of world. But long term, that can also be detrimental. So can deny the child the rights of growing up and what they have access to in terms of reaching their own maturity, sexuality, and reproductive rights. But how do we accommodate that? I don't have all the answers. But I do know that the more we support and the more we collaborate, the better process we're going to have to reaching and finding those solutions and overcoming those challenges.
And by the way, before I do let you go, I have completely abused your generosity in terms of your time and kept you much longer than I had. Had initially.
It's been a good conversation.
Okay, great. Let's touch a bit on your research that you're doing at the moment for your postdoctoral studies.
Okay, so the research, I'm studying it now for a colleague of mine, Calista Kawande, and she's done a lot of work with centers across intellectual impairment. And so I think, as you mentioned, we should give a shout out and chat to your viewers. I don't know if you have links on your site for like these articles you've written in the conversation that you mentioned earlier. And so there's literature. And I was involved with a research project a while ago. And we posted it on YouTube, and it's called, it's about 15 minutes. It's called Sex and Disabilities, Stories from South Africa. And I'll send you a link after the show as well.
Please.
And that's just about 15 minutes and just shares different disabilities and different aspects, just about exactly what we've been talking about. People who were born with a disability, different walks of life in South Africa. I think it's about 6 or 7 participants, showing their journey and their feelings and how they came to terms and what sexuality means to them. And it's just those conversations. And as I said, sexuality starts from how you brush your hair in the morning to, how you meet people that you want to, how you relate to your partners, etc., to communication. So it's all those stepping points. And with that, just trying to navigate that kind of space in the media and in the world today, where there's such a thing on what to look like and how you should behave and how you should be acting and what's cool and what isn't and what's good looking and what isn't, and this kind of warped concept of beauty, in the glossy magazines. It doesn't represent real life in any way or form, and
not at all.
That definitely impacted on me. And so it's about communication, just finding our inner beauty within each other and sharing that, and looking at our strengths and weaknesses and supporting one another. So I think the more I've engaged with disability, the more, and I've spoken to the people I have, the more you kind of learn about what makes us human. And that's been my experience.
Yes.
A lot of parents of children with disabilities will say, these kids are my gift. I've learned so much about what's important in life.
Now, the more I've spoken to you as well, the more I actually realize some of the more I realize that we are actually just the same, and that we tend to place the emphasis in all the wrong places, But something that you just touched on now, which when you spoke about the research work that you guys are doing, which I actually hadn't factored in, was the whole issue of people with, intellectual disabilities. In fact, it was just this was fairly recently when on this feature where we had students that had taken part at the Special Olympics,
Yes.
Yeah, and that sort of thing. And I'm just now thinking here about, wow, actually, this is one I never thought of, because somebody with an intellectual disability, how does one know, or how much they're able to discern or understand things around sexuality, or what is the approach there. I suppose, again, maybe I'm going to answer my own question. This is, I guess it depends on the level of intellectual, disability.
Yes, level of disability and functioning. And so people with intellectual disabilities often have a struggle in mental functioning. So it's like reasoning and rationale and, gauging perceptions and attitudes and work out logical choices. Often can be eager to please. And so that can play some wonderful people to be around. And I can think of, I have family members with Down syndrome, etc. And there's different levels, as you say, exactly, there's different levels of functioning and ability and development. At the same time, we can also make them easy targets.
Exactly.
So I think it's about discussing it and making kids aware and caregivers aware to embrace inclusion in a sense that's going to support everyone, or everyone feels supported and heard and understood.
Because
and that just takes conversation. It takes to see where a kid's at. I mean, I think we all have a level of, in general, whether we have disability or not, we have different levels of tolerance and what we've learned over the years. But it's challenging when it comes to intellectual disability. I don't have a final answer, but
sure.
The more we talk about it, and the more we work with kids, and the more we equip them to understand themselves, the stronger position we'll all be in.
Because I would imagine that just because there are other there are other bodily functions, if that's the correct way of terming it, but rather the fact that their hormones would still function as any other as a person who didn't have an intellectual impairment.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And it's often, I think, one of our tendencies naturally as parents or as caregivers or whoever, in terms of our protection, we want to kind of almost ignore those things happening, and wish they kind of weren't, but out of wanting to protect our kids and make sure they're okay. But in a way, you can't, because it's a natural thing that's happening. So how can we deal with it in the best manner, and how can we go about that? Again, I don't have all the answers. I'm not saying it's easy to do.
Sure.
But I believe that the more we discuss it, the more we can work together. And collaboration is key. I think collaboration is really key, not only from service providers, but it's learning from caregivers and learning from people themselves. So, you can host you could host or conduct a workshop on disability and sexuality. And you probably do quite a good job. You speak well, you come across, you can translate the information.
Thank you.
But if I'm doing it and I'm there in a wheelchair, my motorized wheelchair, and I'm conducting it, I have a profound impact. And I'm showing slides from my life of the kids on my chest, skin to skin, and getting married, etc. It has obviously more of a difference because that's where it's coming from.
It's more convincing.
It's more convincing, but not only that, it's coming from a person who's experienced it. And so what we do a lot with in terms of wheelchair users, I guess in other disabilities as well. I can only really speak as a wheelchair user, but we have a lot of peer group support and training, where if I'm a young kid out of hospital and I've just become paralyzed, and I want to know about family and sexuality, I want to speak to somebody who's been there and done that.
Yes.
And learn from their experience, because they know what I'm talking about, and they can share their ideas and experiences, as opposed to a middle-aged social worker who hasn't lived that same life and has only learned from a textbook. I'm not trying to do social workers. I'm just using an example that I had. They weren't equipped. They weren't trained. So when I conduct workshops as well, I hear a lot from physiotherapists and OTs that say, we never learned this. We never learned about this in the university. And say, yeah, but that's why I want to change the curriculum. So that's my passion, is positioning disability across all curricula, so that when we produce graduates that are going into professional practice, they have an idea and they're more confident about discussing disability and including disability in the, who are experts in their own lives. I'm an expert in my life.
Yeah.
And I know what I need, and I've learned what I need. But I've been very lucky and very privileged to have those opportunities and to make the most of them. I think a lot of people with disabilities in this country are denied that.
100%. Dr. Vic McKinney, thank you so much for your time this evening. This has been a most fascinating conversation. I have learned a lot. I continue to learn a lot, actually, on this feature, that we do on a weekly basis. And it's through people like you and the work that you're doing. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
That is Dr. Vic McKinney. He is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Division of Disabilities and Rehabilitation Studies with Stellenbosch University. Is it Stellenbosch University or is it University of Stellenbosch? And I hear people always go Stellenbosch University. There's a difference. I know I'm being pedantic, but like the other day I heard someone, the BBC, talking about the University of Oxford. And then I always hear people talk about Oxford University. It's the University of Oxford. Let's get it right. So fascinating. This is such a great feature, I must say. Congratulate Denzel, because this is a feature I found on the show, and one of those that I thought, oh, we absolutely have to carry it on. It's such important stuff. I have learned so much just in over a month of doing this feature, and the interactions that we've had with people with disabilities and just hearing about their lives and all of that. It has been so eye-opening, and even more so now talking about sexuality and the levels of ignorance. We're going to die of ignorance, guys. I'm telling you, we really are going to die of ignorance. But one thing that I do think is important that we need to really look at as well, maybe it's not just South Africa, but the world, about integrating people with disabilities in our schooling system. I know it's difficult because you have to have some of them have very particular special needs, but I think if we had been exposed, just like we're now exposed to people of different races and different religions and all of that, we are equipped to handle it. So we can learn, I think.